This story delves into themes of psychological distress and the unsettling nature of reality. Listener discretion is advised. Imagine waking up one morning, surrounded by the familiar comfort of your own bedroom, only to discover that the person sleeping next to you isn't who you remember, or that the photos on your nightstand are of strangers, or that your entire life, every memory, every relationship, has been subtly, terrifyingly rewritten. This isn't a nightmare you can shake off. This is what happened to David Miller. Before everything changed, David's life was, well, normal. Achingly, predictably normal. He was 32, lived in a decent, if slightly cramped, apartment in the suburbs of Boston, and worked as a mid-level analyst at Sterling & Finch, a financial services firm so utterly bland it practically radiated beige. His days were a monotonous cycle of spreadsheets, lukewarm coffee, and the soul-crushing drone of his boss, Mr. Henderson, whose voice could curdle milk from 50 paces. His relationship with Sarah Jenkins, his girlfriend of 4 years, was in a similar state of gentle decay. They loved each other, he thought, or at least they had. But lately, their conversations had become less about shared dreams and more about shared anxieties. The rising cost of living, the pressure to settle down, the quiet dread of another Tuesday night spent watching reruns. Sarah was a kindergarten teacher, vibrant and full of life in her classroom, but at home, under the weight of their combined exhaustion, she often seemed just as muted as David felt. He remembered the night it all spiraled. It was a Tuesday, naturally. Mr. Henderson had dropped a last-minute, impossible report on his desk at 4:55 p.m., demanding it by morning. David had stayed until 10, the fluorescent lights humming a sickly lullaby as his eyes blurred over columns of figures that refused to make sense. He'd called Sarah to explain he'd be late, again, and her sigh on the other end of the line had been a physical blow, heavy with disappointment he couldn't argue with. He knew she was tired of it too. Tired of the excuses, tired of the endless grind. He finally stumbled through his front door, the digital clock on the microwave flashing 10:47 p.m. Sarah was already asleep, a book open on her chest, the bedside lamp casting a soft glow on her face. He looked at her, at the quiet rhythm of her breathing, and felt a wave of something akin to despair wash over him. Not anger, not even sadness, just a profound, bone-deep weariness. He was trapped. Trapped in the job, trapped in the routine, trapped in a relationship that felt more like a shared obligation than a partnership. He went to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the dark, silent street. The streetlights cast long, lonely shadows, and for a moment, he felt utterly invisible. He closed his eyes, a desperate, childish plea forming in his mind. He didn't articulate it fully, not in words, but the feeling was overwhelming. A raw, aching desire for an escape, for a chance to just reset, to wipe the slate clean, to start fresh, like none of this had ever happened. He remembered the intensity of that moment, the way his chest ached with the unspoken wish. He opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and dismissed it as a fleeting fantasy, the byproduct of too much caffeine and too little sleep. He finished his water, went to bed, and fell into a restless, dreamless sleep beside Sarah. That was the last normal night David Miller ever had. He woke up the next morning to the sound of an unfamiliar alarm clock. Not his usual digital beep, but a gentle melodic chime he'd never heard before. He blinked, disoriented, and reached out for Sarah, but his hand met only cool, empty sheets. He sat up, a prickle of unease starting at the base of his neck. Sarah was an early riser, but she usually left a note, or at least the faint smell of her morning coffee. He swung his legs out of bed, his bare feet hitting a carpet that felt different. Thicker, softer, a slightly darker shade of gray. He frowned. Had they replaced the carpet? He didn't remember that. He walked towards the bathroom, his mind still fuzzy with sleep, and paused at the doorway. The bathroom was not theirs. The tiles were a different color. The shower curtain was a modern geometric pattern instead of Sarah's floral design, and the toiletries on the sink were brands he didn't recognize. His own toothbrush was there, along with a tube of toothpaste he never bought. A cold knot began to form in his stomach. He backed away slowly, scanning the bedroom again. The furniture was the same layout, but the dresser was a different wood. The bedside lamps were sleek and minimalist instead of the antique ones Sarah had inherited. And the photos on his nightstand, the ones of him and Sarah laughing at the beach or hiking in Vermont, were gone, replaced by framed prints of abstract art. Panic began to bubble, cold and sharp. This had to be a dream. A vivid, hyper-realistic dream. He pinched himself hard. Nothing. The room remained stubbornly, terrifyingly real. He stumbled into the living room, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was the same apartment, the same overall layout, but every single detail was wrong. The couch was a different color, the bookshelf held unfamiliar titles, and the old, slightly wobbly coffee table they'd bought at a flea market was replaced by a sleek, glass-topped one. He grabbed his phone, his hands shaking. He needed to call Sarah. She would explain this. She would tell him he was still half asleep, that he was having a breakdown, that everything was fine. He fumbled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over her name. But Sarah's name wasn't there. His contact list was filled with names he didn't recognize. Jessica Marketing, Mark Project Lead, Aunt Carol. Not his Aunt Carol, though. He only had one aunt, and her name was Susan. He typed Sarah into the search bar. Nothing. No Sarah Jenkins. No Sarah at all. His breath hitched. This was impossible. He tried to dial his own number, hoping to hear his familiar voicemail, but his finger slipped, hitting an unfamiliar contact. Mom. He hadn't spoken to his mother in years. They had a complicated, strained relationship, bordering on estranged. He definitely didn't have her listed as Mom in his phone. He pressed the call button on instinct. A woman's voice, warm and familiar in a way that made his stomach clench, answered. David? Everything all right, sweetie? You never call this early. It was his mother. But her voice was lighter, happier, devoid of the usual guarded tone. And the sweetie was a shock. They simply didn't talk like that. He stammered, Mom? Is that you? She chuckled. Of course it's me, who else would it be? Are you feeling okay? You sound a little off. I think so. I had a really weird dream. He tried to sound normal, but his voice was thin, reedy. Listen, Mom, do you know a Sarah Jenkins? A beat of silence. Then her voice tinged with confusion. Sarah Jenkins? No, I don't think so, honey. Is she a new client? Or maybe someone from your old college days I've forgotten? His world tilted. Sarah didn't exist in his mother's memory. She didn't exist in his phone. She didn't exist, period. He mumbled an excuse, hung up, and stared at the phone. The sleek, unfamiliar device felt heavy in his hand, a tangible piece of this new, terrifying reality. His pulse pounded in his ears. He walked to the front door, his mind racing. He needed to get out to see if the world outside was just as warped. He pulled on his shoes, noticing they were a different brand, a different style than he usually wore. He opened the door. His neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was watering her petunias. She looked up, smiled, and waved. Morning, David. Beautiful day, isn't it? Mrs. Rodriguez. That was right. She was his neighbor. But her house was painted a different color. And her petunias were usually red, not purple. He forced a smile back, his throat tight. Morning, Mrs. Rodriguez. He walked down the street, his head swiveling. The cars parked along the curb were all unfamiliar. The old oak tree at the corner, the one with the swing his landlord's kids used to play on, was gone, replaced by a freshly paved patch of sidewalk. The little bakery he loved, the one that made the best sourdough in town, was now a sterile-looking juice bar. He pulled out his phone again, desperate. He needed to check his work email to see if Sterling and Finch still existed, if Mr. Henderson was still his tormentor. He found an email app, but the icon was different. He tapped it, and a login screen appeared for something called Omnicorp Solutions. His name was there, David Miller, but below it, a title, Senior Director of Digital Strategy. Senior Director? He was an analyst, a mid-level spreadsheet jockey analyst. He tried to log in, but his usual password didn't work. He tried another. Nothing. He felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in his throat. He was locked out of his own life. Or rather, locked out of a life that was supposedly his but was utterly foreign. He clutched his head, leaning against a lamppost, the morning sun feeling strangely cold on his face. The wish, that desperate, whispered wish from the night before, to wipe the slate clean, to start fresh, like none of this had ever happened. It had been granted, literally, and the terrifying truth began to settle in. His old life, his actual life, the one with Sarah and Sterling and Finch and Mr. Henderson and red petunias, was gone. Erased. and he was now stranded in a reality that felt like a meticulously crafted forgery, a life where he was a stranger, living a story he didn't recognize. The real horror wasn't just what he had lost, but what he had unwittingly created. And the question that chilled him to his core was, if his life could be rewritten so easily, what else had changed? And what or who was behind it? Michael stumbled backwards, the polished marble floor suddenly feeling like shifting ice beneath his bare feet. The silence of the redesigned living room pressed in on him, amplifying the frantic thrumming in his ears. This couldn't be real. It was a dream, a nightmare, a psychotic break. He pinched himself hard. The sharp, stinging pain was undeniably real. He snatched his phone from the sleek, wireless charging pad on the modern glass coffee table. The wallpaper was a high-resolution aerial shot of a bustling metropolis he barely recognized, bathed in the golden glow of sunset. Not the blurry photo of him and Jessica laughing on their last beach vacation. He unlocked it with a fingerprint, his own, yet the interface was alien. A torrent of notifications flooded the screen. Emails from Sterling and Finch LLP, calendar reminders for Client Summit Tokyo, board meeting Q4 projections. His contacts list was a roster of unfamiliar names: Mr. Henderson CEO, Lawyer Chan, Associate Miller. Jessica's name, her photo, their shared memories all gone. He scrolled frantically, his thumb aching, but found nothing. Not a single trace. His heart hammered against his ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. He needed to see his own face, his own identity, something concrete. He sprinted to the master bathroom, a cavernous space of dark tile and gleaming chrome. The reflection staring back at him was undeniably Michael Vance. His eyes, his nose, the familiar mole above his left eyebrow. But there was a sharpness to his jawline, a subtle tautness around his mouth that wasn't quite his. This Michael looked harder, more successful, and utterly exhausted. He tore open the medicine cabinet, sending expensive men's skincare products clattering into the sink. Beneath a pile of neatly folded towels, he found his wallet. His driver's license photo was indeed him, but again that subtle, unsettling shift in expression. The address was correct, his birthday, but the occupation listed was Senior Corporate Attorney. Michael Vance, Senior Corporate Attorney. The words felt like a cruel joke, a twisted punchline to a life he hadn't lived. His old credit cards, the ones with the perpetually low limits, were replaced by platinum and black cards, emblazoned with names of banks he'd only ever seen in glossy magazine ads. A stack of crisp $100 bills almost mocked him with their presence. He stumbled back into the bedroom, his gaze sweeping over the unfamiliar luxury. This wasn't just an upgrade, it was a complete overhaul. The walk-in closet, which used to hold his worn jeans and a few sensible suits, was now a fashion boutique of designer labels and bespoke tailoring. He saw a framed photo on the bedside table. He lunged for it, hope warring with dread. It was him, all right. Standing on a yacht, arm around a stunning, elegant woman with striking red hair and a dazzling smile he'd never seen before. Behind them, a glittering coastline he didn't recognize. A small plaque at the bottom read, Michael and Victoria Santorini 2023. Victoria? Who was Victoria? And where was Jessica? A cold dread seeped into him, colder than the marble floor. He remembered the desperate, whispered wish he'd made countless times in the darkest hours of his struggling architecture career. I just wish I was successful. I wish I had financial stability. I wish I didn't have to worry about money every single day. He'd wished for it with every fiber of his being, a desperate plea to the universe for a better life. And now he had it. Literally. The universe, or whatever perverse entity had hurt him, had granted his wish with terrifying precision. It hadn't just given him success, it had made him successful. It hadn't just provided financial stability, it had built a life of immense wealth around him. And in doing so, it had meticulously removed every single element that didn't fit that new narrative. Jessica, his true love, his partner through thick and thin, had been an integral part of his struggle. Their modest life, their shared dreams of building a small, sustainable practice, all of it was part of the unsuccessful existence he had wished away. He sank onto the edge of the impossibly soft, king-sized bed, his head in his hands. He was a stranger in his own life, a ghost haunting a lavish mansion built on the ruins of his past. He felt a profound, aching loss not just for Jessica, but for the very essence of who he was. The struggling architect, the man who found joy in the simple lines of a well-designed building, the man who valued connection over capital. Where was that Michael? Had he ever existed? Or had he been erased, overwritten by this sleek, successful, solitary corporate attorney? He needed to find Jessica. This couldn't be her. She had to be somewhere. He tried to think of their old apartment address, their favorite coffee shop, the small park where he proposed. Frantically, he typed their address into the GPS on his phone. The map pulled up a location, but the street view showed a gleaming new high-rise. Not their familiar brick building. He typed in the coffee shop's name. Location not found. The park? It existed, but it was now a manicured, minimalist green space, devoid of the ancient oak tree under which he'd knelt. A wave of nausea washed over him. The world around him wasn't just changed. It felt like a meticulously crafted alternate reality, designed to erase every trace of his former self. He was trapped in a golden cage, surrounded by the fruits of a prosperity he hadn't earned, a life he didn't want. He tried to call his family. His mother, his sister Sarah. Their numbers were gone too. He tried to recall his mother's maiden name, his sister's married name, anything that might help him find them through a public search. But his mind, usually sharp with details, felt foggy, as if a crucial part of his memory had been selectively redacted. He knew he had a mother, a sister, but their faces, their voices, their specific details were frustratingly elusive, like trying to grasp smoke. The silence of the house began to feel less like peace and more like an active presence, a watchful entity. He felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the irrational fear that he wasn't alone, that something was observing his every panicked move. Was this the who behind it? An unseen force, a cosmic administrator of wishes, ensuring every detail was literally fulfilled? He stood, his gaze falling upon a beautifully carved wooden desk in the corner of the room. It was an antique, an ornate piece that seemed out of place amidst the modern minimalism. He walked towards it, drawn by a faint glint. On its polished surface, nestled amongst a stack of leather-bound law books and a crystal paperweight, was a small, unassuming object. It was a silver locket. Not just any locket. His locket, the one he'd given to Jessica on their first anniversary, engraved with their initials, MV plus JM, and the date. He remembered losing it months ago, a frantic search that yielded nothing. He'd been heartbroken, assuming it was gone forever, yet here it was perfectly preserved, sitting in this alien world. His fingers trembled as he picked it up. It felt cool and familiar against his skin. He flipped it open. Inside, on one side, was a tiny faded photo of a younger Jessica beaming. On the other side, a mirror-polished surface, reflecting his own haunted eyes. But something was wrong. The reflection wasn't quite right. It was him, yes, but the image seemed flatter, two-dimensional, as if he wasn't looking at his own reflection, but a carefully crafted picture of himself, laid into the locket. He squinted, trying to make sense of it. The light caught it at an odd angle, and for a fleeting second, he thought he saw a faint, almost invisible seam running down the center of his reflected image, like a photograph that had been perfectly cut and reassembled. He snapped the locket shut, the metallic click echoing loudly in the silent room. This was an anomaly, a piece of his old life, preserved, yet subtly distorted. Why was it here? And why was his reflection so artificial? He remembered the locket had two pictures inside, Jessica's and one of him, but the other side was now a mirror. Had his picture been removed? Or had it never been there in this new reality? A chilling thought permeated his panic. What if the wish hadn't just changed his life but had replaced him? What if the Michael Vance reflected in the locket, the one who was a senior corporate attorney, wasn't truly him? What if he was merely an echo, a consciousness trapped within a body that belonged to someone else, someone who had already lived this meticulously constructed, successful life? The idea was horrifying. It wasn't just his life that was rewritten. It was him, a puppet, a placeholder, given a new script and thrust onto a stage he didn't recognize. And the locket, his locket, was the only tangible link, a fragile thread connecting him to a past that had been systematically dismantled. What did the mirror reflection mean? Was it a symbol of his new, empty existence? Or a warning? He clutched the locket tightly, the metal digging into his palm. He was no longer just confused, he was terrified. He had to understand. He had to find out what had truly happened to his old life, to Jessica, and to the real Michael Vance. and he had a sickening feeling that the answers lay hidden not in the grand success of this new life, but in the subtle, terrifying anomalies that were beginning to surface, like cracks in a perfectly painted facade. He was in a maze, and every path led further away from home, deeper into a terrifying reality that was both his and utterly not his. He was alive, yes, but was he real? The question hung heavy in the air, a suffocating shroud of existential dread. He was alive, yes, but was he real? The question hung heavy in the air, a suffocating shroud of existential dread. Michael stared at his reflection in the polished steel of the elevator doors, a stranger staring back. His eyes, though, were undeniably his own, wide, bloodshot, and frantic. He pressed the button for the ground floor, the descent feeling less like a journey and more like a fall into an abyss. Every floor number that lit up felt like another layer of his old life being peeled away, revealing nothing but a void beneath. Stepping out into the lobby, the familiar scent of expensive coffee and new carpet was a cruel mockery. He knew this building, or thought he did. He worked here, or thought he did. But the faces passing by were all unfamiliar, their greetings directed at others, their smiles reserved for a world he no longer seemed to inhabit. He pulled out his phone, his hand trembling. He needed Jessica. He needed David. He needed a voice that knew him. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over Jessica Home. He pressed it, the dial tone a shrill alarm in his ear. 1 ring, 2, 3. Then a woman's voice, clear and professional, answered. "Hello, this is Green Valley Realty. How can I help you?" Michael froze. Green Valley Realty? Jessica was a kindergarten teacher. Always had been. His heart hammered against his ribs. I think I have the wrong number," he stammered, his voice raw. "I was trying to reach Jessica Miller." "We don't have anyone by that name here," the voice replied, polite but firm. "Are you sure you have the correct number?" He hung up, the phone feeling like a dead weight in his hand. He tried David, his best friend since college. The number didn't even connect. An automated voice informed him the number was no longer in service. A cold dread seeped into his bones, colder than the air conditioning blasting in the lobby. His world wasn't just altered, it was erased. The people who grounded him, who defined his reality, were gone. He stumbled out of the building, the bustling city street an assault on his senses. Taxis whizzed by, pedestrians flowed around him like water around a stone, utterly oblivious to the silent scream building inside him. He needed to go home. His home. That was the last bastion, the last place where some shred of his old life might remain. He hailed a cab, giving the driver his address. The driver, a jovial man named Frank according to his ID, nodded without a second glance. "Got it, pal. Heading that way anyway." The normalcy of the interaction was jarring. Was he the only one who noticed the world had fundamentally shifted? As the cab weaved through traffic, Michael stared out the window, every landmark a distorted echo of memory. The coffee shop on Elm Street was now a pet grooming salon. The old bookstore a trendy vape shop. It was all wrong. Yet, the city hummed along, utterly convinced of its own authenticity. Finally, the cab pulled up to what should have been his street. But it wasn't. The houses were different, the trees taller, the parked cars unfamiliar. His house, the cozy two-story with the blue door and the rose bushes Jessica loved, was gone. In its place stood a sleek, modern structure of glass and steel, utterly alien. "This isn't it," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible. Frank, the cab driver, turned. "Isn't what, buddy?" "This is 1422 Willow Creek Lane. Exactly where you told Maine." "No, my house, it's not here," Michael insisted, pointing a trembling finger at the glass monstrosity. "My house is a blue house with a porch, not this." Frank chuckled, a warm, reassuring sound that only served to highlight Michael's unraveling sanity. "Been living in this neighborhood for 20 years, pal. That's always been the place at 1422. Maybe you're a little disoriented." He gave Michael a sympathetic look in the rearview mirror. "Long day, huh?" Michael didn't answer. He paid the fare, the numbers on the bill feeling foreign in his hand, and stepped out onto the curb. He walked slowly like a ghost toward the modern house. He peered through the large windows, seeing minimalist furniture, abstract art, and a pristine kitchen. No trace of Jessica's vibrant chaos, no sign of his worn armchair, no familiar photographs on the mantel. This was not his life. This was not his home. As he stood there, a sudden sharp memory pierced through the fog of confusion. He was at a bar a few months ago, after a particularly grueling week at work. He'd been feeling trapped, stifled, bogged down by responsibilities, by the endless cycle of bills and expectations. He remembered the exact moment. Holding a lukewarm beer, staring into the flickering candlelight, feeling an overwhelming sense of dissatisfaction. He'd leaned over to David, slurring slightly, and said, "God, I wish I could just start over. A clean slate. Away from all this. Just a whole new life." David, ever the pragmatist, had laughed it off. "Careful what you wish for, buddy. You might actually get it, and then where would you be?" The memory hit Michael with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back, gasping for air. A whole new life. He'd said it. He'd wished it. And now this was a whole new life. A terrifyingly literal interpretation. He was away from all this: his wife, his best friend, his home, his job. Everything. Panic, cold and absolute, gripped him. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a prank. This was a granted wish. A wish granted with brutal, unfeeling precision. He had wished for a clean slate, a new life, and the universe, or whatever cosmic force was at play, had delivered. But it hadn't delivered the idealized version he'd envisioned. It had taken his words at face value, stripped away everything he knew, and left him adrift in a reality that felt like a carefully constructed replica designed to torture him. He needed proof. Tangible, undeniable proof that this wasn't his life. He pulled out his wallet. His driver's license photo stared back at him, unequivocally his face, but the address listed was the sleek glass house. The birth date was correct, but the issuing state was different. His credit cards bore his name, Michael Thompson, but the bank logo was unfamiliar. His health insurance card listed a different provider, a different plan. Every single piece of identification confirmed he was Michael Thompson, living at 1422 Willow Creek Lane, employed by a company he'd never heard of, and connected to a web of services that were utterly alien to him. He was Michael Thompson, but he wasn't Michael Thompson. The paradox was maddening. A knot of reality and unreality twisting tighter with every passing second. He was standing on a street that felt both familiar and utterly foreign. In a body that was his own but inhabited a life that wasn't. He needed to find someone. Someone who might have known him, the old him. He remembered Emily, a colleague from his old job, someone he often got coffee with. He searched his phone again, but her number was gone. His LinkedIn profile, when he managed to access it through a new unfamiliar email account, showed him working as a senior systems architect for a company called Omnicorp Solutions. There was no mention of his previous employer, Sterling Financial. No mention of Emily, or David, or even Jessica. He felt a primal scream bubbling up from his gut, but he choked it down. He couldn't afford to break down here on this alien street in front of this alien house. He had to think. He had to understand. If his wish was granted, then there must be a mechanism, a rule, a way to undo it. Or at least to understand the parameters. He looked back at the glass house, then down the street. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, unsettling shadows. He was homeless, jobless, friendless, and wifeless in a world that was technically his, but utterly devoid of everything he held dear. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He had wished for a fresh start, and he had gotten one. A barren, terrifyingly fresh start. He needed a base of operations, somewhere to think, somewhere to figure out his next move. The new house, for all its alienness, was listed as his address. He had the keys in his pocket, keys that felt heavy and cold, like the weight of his new, unwanted existence. With a deep, shuddering breath, Michael turned and walked toward the glass door, the setting sun glinting off its surface like a mocking eye. He was about to step into the life he had wished for, a life he now desperately wanted to escape. The silence of the house, as he inserted the key and pushed the door open, was deafening. It was the silence of a tomb, meticulously prepared for a man who was still alive, but utterly dead to his past. He stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind him, sealing him into his meticulously granted nightmare. Michael stood frozen in the entryway. The click of the door behind him was unnervingly soft, yet final. The air inside was cool, dry, and utterly still, carrying no scent of life, no hint of a previous occupant, only the sterile aroma of new paint and synthetic materials. The light emanating from recessed fixtures in the ceiling was uniformly bright, casting no shadows, creating a flat, almost two-dimensional environment. It felt less like a home and more like a showroom, meticulously arranged but devoid of soul. He took a tentative step onto a short pile light gray carpet, his bare feet sinking slightly. The quiet was absolute, a profound pressure against his eardrums. He could hear the frantic beat of his own heart, a lonely drum in an empty world. His gaze swept across what appeared to be a living room. A sofa, a coffee table, and an armchair, all in shades of beige and gray, sat perfectly aligned. There were no books, no magazines, no remote controls, no decorative knickknacks, no personal touches of any kind. It was furniture for the sake of furniture, existing only to occupy space. He walked slowly towards the sofa, his movements feeling strangely heavy, as if gravity had increased its hold on him. He reached out a hand, his fingers brushing against the coarse fabric. It felt cheap, utilitarian. Not uncomfortable, but certainly not inviting. He sat down, the cushions offering minimal give. It was a place to sit, nothing more. Across from him, a large flat-screen television was mounted on the wall, a black rectangle mirroring his own bewildered reflection. He stared at it, a flicker of hope igniting within him. Perhaps it wasn't connected, but maybe there was a button, a hidden panel, something to break the silence. He searched the coffee table, ran his hands along the arms of the sofa, even knelt to check beneath it. Nothing. No remote. No power button. Just a silent black void. He got up, a growing sense of dread coiling in his stomach. This wasn't just empty. It was purposefully empty. It was a stage stripped bare. He moved into the adjoining area, which served as a kitchen and dining space. A small square table with 2 chairs stood in the center, again generic and functional. The kitchen itself was pristine. Stainless steel appliances gleamed under the relentless light, a refrigerator, a stove, a microwave. He pulled open the refrigerator door. Inside, perfectly organized, were rows of identical, unlabeled containers. He picked one up. It was a clear plastic box, containing what looked like a grayish nutrient paste. Next to it, another box held a clear liquid water, presumably. There were no fresh fruits, no vegetables, no condiments, no snacks, no anything that suggested choice or pleasure in eating. Just sustenance. He opened the freezer. More of the same. The pantry cabinets yielded only identical, foil-wrapped energy bars and further containers of the bland paste. This was food designed solely for survival, devoid of flavor, texture, or joy. His stomach rumbled, a stark reminder of his hunger, but the sight of the paste made him feel even sicker. He checked the drawers. Cutlery, basic plates and cups, all stainless steel or plain white ceramic. No dish towels, no oven mitts, no spices, no coffee maker. Nothing that made a kitchen a home. A wave of nausea washed over him. He stumbled towards what he hoped was a bathroom. He found it off a short hallway. Inside, a toilet, a sink, and a shower stall, all gleaming white. On the counter, a single unlabeled bar of soap and a plain white towel. No toothbrush, no toothpaste, no shampoo, no razor. Nothing personal. He splashed cold water on his face, the shock momentarily clearing his head. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, his eyes wide and hollow, dark circles beneath them. He barely recognized the man staring back. He moved to the next door, finding a bedroom. A queen-sized bed, covered in a plain white duvet and 2 pillows, occupied the center of the room. The mattress felt firm, unyielding. No bedside tables, no lamps, no alarm clock. A built-in closet stretched along one wall. He slid open the mirrored doors. Inside, hanging neatly, were 5 identical outfits: plain gray t-shirts, dark gray trousers, and a pair of simple black sneakers. On a shelf above, folded, were 5 pairs of white underwear and 5 pairs of black socks. It was a uniform, a basic provision for his physical needs, stripping him of any individual expression. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, the reality of his situation pressing down on him, heavier than any physical weight. This wasn't merely a house. It was a perfectly engineered environment designed to fulfill his literal wish. He had wished for nothing. Nothing to own, nothing to owe, nothing to be tied to. And this house was the physical manifestation of that nothingness. It provided the bare minimum for existence, but stripped away every shred of comfort, every personal connection, every choice, every vestige of the life he had once known. He looked around the sterile room, his gaze lingering on the single small window high on the wall, too high to see out of without standing on something. He dragged a chair from the kitchen and climbed onto it, his heart pounding with a desperate hope. He peered out. His breath hitched. Outside there was nothing. Not a street, not a tree, not another house, not even the sky. Just a uniform, opaque gray wall, stretching as far as he could see in any direction. It was as if the house was encased in a featureless box, or perhaps existed in a void. There was no sun, no moon, no stars, no weather. Just an infinite, unchanging gray. It wasn't a view, it was an absence of one. He stumbled back, falling off the chair, landing hard on the carpet. A cry of despair tore from his throat, raw and guttural, echoing eerily in the silent house. He scrambled to his feet, running back to the front door, yanking on the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. He tried the windows, pushing against the glass in the living room, in the kitchen. They were sealed shut, immovable. There was no escape. He pounded on the front door, his fists aching, his voice hoarse as he screamed, "Hello? Is anyone out there? Let me out. Please. This isn't what I wanted." His pleas were swallowed by the oppressive silence, mocking him with their futility. He slid down the door, collapsing onto the floor, his head in his hands. Tears streamed down his face, hot and stinging. He had wished to be free, to be unburdened, to disappear. And he had been granted the wish with a terrifying precision. He was free from everything, free from his family, free from his job, free from his debts, free from his identity. But in that freedom, he had lost everything that made life worth living. He was free, yes, but also utterly alone, adrift in a perfectly furnished prison of his own making. The nothing he had craved was not peace, not a blank canvas for a new beginning. It was an absolute, suffocating void. A life without purpose, without connection, without even the simple joy of a chosen meal or a familiar scent. He was an empty vessel, meticulously maintained, but with no fuel, no destination, and no crew. He lay there for a long time, the cold seeping into his bones, the bland light never wavering, never dimming. He was Michael, but without a past, without a future, without a present that held any meaning. The thought that gripped him, chilling him to the core, was not just that he was trapped, but that he was expected to live here, to eat the tasteless food, to wear the generic clothes, to exist within these four walls until when? Until he starved? Until he went mad? Or until he simply ceased to be, fulfilling the wish for nothingness in its ultimate form? He closed his eyes, desperate for darkness, for a break from the relentless artificial light. But even with his eyes shut, the gray wall behind the window seemed imprinted on his eyelids. The silence hummed, a constant, low thrum that was almost a sound in itself, the sound of absolute emptiness. He was a ghost in his own life, haunting a house that was built specifically for his non-existence. His wish had been granted, literally, and the literal interpretation was a slow, agonizing death of the soul. He wasn't just dead to the world was dead to him, and he was left to wander its sterile, pre-programmed afterlife. He existed within a vacuum of presence, a world that moved around him but never with him. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed play from an invisible, soundproof booth, except the stage was his entire life, and the actors were everyone he had ever known, living out meticulously crafted, endlessly looping routines. The vibrant colors of his memory had been drained to a muted, almost sepia-toned reality, a constant twilight of the soul. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his throat. He tried to reach out, to touch the fleeting fabric of a passing stranger's coat, but his hand phased through it like mist through a ghost. He was a phantom, observing a world that was stubbornly, terribly real for everyone else, yet agonizingly fake to him. The faces that passed by were familiar, yet devoid of the spark of true consciousness. He saw an old man, Mr. Henderson, from his childhood street, meticulously watering the same rose bushes at precisely 7:15 a.m. every day, just as he always had. He saw a young woman, Sarah, from his college dorm, walking her poodle down the sidewalk, her movements so fluid, so realistic, yet her eyes held no depth, no flicker of recognition, no soul. They were puppets, performing for an audience of one, him. The first few days were a maelstrom of terror and frantic attempts to break through the invisible barrier. He ran through the streets, dodging spectral cars, shouting unheard warnings, trying to jostle the shoulders of the programmed pedestrians. He threw himself against locked doors, against solid walls, against the very air itself, hoping for a jolt, a crack, a sign that this was all a terrible nightmare from which he could awaken. But there was no awakening. There was only the endless, monotonous hum of a world that continued without him, utterly indifferent to his profound, agonizing isolation. He watched his own apartment building, Inside, he knew a version of him, a literal echo, would be living out a life that was now utterly meaningless to the real him. He saw a woman, Emily, his fiancée, walk out of the building. Her hair was just as he remembered, a cascade of auburn catching the morning light. Her laugh, a delicate chime, echoed in his mind, though he heard no actual sound from her. She was talking to a man, a colleague perhaps, or a friend. They were discussing plans for the weekend, plans that once involved him. Now he was just a ghost at the periphery, an uninvited observer to his own erasure. The pain was a physical entity, a constant gnawing at the very core of his being. It wasn't the pain of a broken bone or a bruised body. It was the pain of a soul being stretched thin, pulled apart, atom by the sheer, overwhelming emptiness of his existence. He yearned for a single point of genuine contact, a fleeting glance, a moment of shared breath, but the world stubbornly denied him even that. He was a glitch in the matrix, an anomaly that the system had no protocol for, yet also no means to completely delete. As the weeks bled into months, the initial panic gave way to a chilling, desolate routine. He stopped trying to interact. He stopped trying to scream. He simply watched. He became an expert in the intricate patterns of this simulated reality. He knew when the postal worker, a cheerful man named David, would deliver mail to house number 17. He knew when the ice cream truck, playing its tinny, repetitive melody, would turn the corner onto Elm Street. He knew the precise moment the streetlights would flicker on, painting the sterile world in an artificial glow. Every event was predictable, every interaction scripted, every emotion a hollow mimicry. He started to see the flaws, the minute imperfections in the grand design. A woman, Jessica, would walk her dog past the same park bench every day at 3 p.m. But one day her dog, a golden retriever named Max, would briefly glitch, its tail wagging in an unnatural jerky motion before snapping back to fluid realism. A car would pass, and for a split second, its reflection in a shop window would be a distorted, pixelated mess before resolving into perfect clarity. These were tiny cracks in the facade, whispers of the underlying code that governed his literal afterlife. These glitches became his only source of fascination, his only connection to something beyond the perfect, suffocating monotony. He began to actively seek them out, to trace their patterns, to understand their rhythm. It was a perverse game, a desperate attempt to find meaning in a meaningless existence. He theorized that these glitches were not random errors, but rather echoes of the world he had once inhabited, moments where the simulation struggled to perfectly replicate a reality that had once included him. One afternoon, while observing a bustling marketplace, a particularly vivid glitch occurred. A fruit vendor, a stern-faced man named Frank, was arranging a pyramid of apples. Suddenly, the entire pyramid shimmered, dissolved into a cascade of glowing green particles, and then reformed perfectly identical, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. For that fleeting second, he had seen something beyond the simulation, a glimpse into the raw data, the underlying code. And within that code, amidst the swirling green particles, he thought he saw a symbol, an intricate, almost alien glyph that pulsed with a faint, ethereal light. He tried to focus on it, to etch it into his memory, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. The experience left him shaken, but also invigorated with a chilling new purpose. This wasn't just a sterile afterlife, it was a system. And systems, he knew, could be exploited. They had weaknesses, backdoors, ways to be circumvented. If he could understand the glitches, perhaps he could understand the code. If he could understand the code, perhaps he could find a way out. Or, at the very least, a way to truly end his existence, to finally achieve the oblivion his granted wish had so cruelly denied him. The thought was a dangerous one, a fragile flicker of hope in the vast darkness. But it was hope nonetheless. He began to meticulously document every anomaly, every flicker, every momentary distortion. He mentally mapped the recurring patterns, the times of day, the specific locations where these glitches were most prevalent. He observed that the glitches tended to occur more frequently in places that held significant emotional weight for him in his past life. His childhood home, the park where he proposed to Emily, the coffee shop where he spent countless hours working on his thesis. It was as if his own subconscious memories were straining against the artificial construct, causing ripples in the simulated fabric of reality. This realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. His very presence, his lingering consciousness, was disrupting the program. He was, in a twisted sense, still affecting the world, even if only in these minute, almost imperceptible ways. He wasn't entirely powerless. He was a bug, yes, but a bug that could potentially crash the system. He intensified his observations, focusing on the most complex glitches, the ones that lasted slightly longer, the ones that seemed to reveal more of the underlying structure. He noticed a peculiar detail. The glyph he had seen in the fruit market glitch, or variations of it, would sometimes briefly appear during other significant distortions. It was like a watermark, a signature of the entity or mechanism that had created this literal prison. He started to follow the path of these glitches, charting their geographical distribution, looking for a nexus, a central point where the fabric of this reality was weakest, most prone to tearing. He walked for days, for weeks, through the repetitive streets, past the looping lives, his mind a whirlwind of data points and theoretical connections. He felt a desperate urgency, a growing sense that time, though meaningless in this existence, was somehow still a factor. He didn't know why, but a primal instinct told him he needed to understand this system before something irreversible happened, before the glitches stopped, before the simulation perfected itself, trapping him in an unbreakable, eternal loop of observation and despair. His quest led him to the outskirts of what he remembered as his hometown, to a place he rarely visited in his actual life, an old abandoned observatory perched on a desolate hill. It was a place of forgotten dreams and decaying machinery, a relic of a past ambition. As he approached it, the glitches became more frequent, more intense. The very air around him seemed to shimmer, the ground beneath his feet momentarily dissolving into a kaleidoscope of green and blue pixels. The sound of the wind, usually a sterile, programmed whisper, now carried a faint, almost imperceptible static, like a distant radio tuned to a forgotten frequency. This was it. This was the nexus, the heart of the simulation, or at least a significant access point. And as he stepped through the rusted gate, the world around him fractured into 1,000 shimmering fragments, revealing a vast, dark, cosmic void beneath. The world didn't just fracture, it vaporized. Michael didn't fall so much as he ceased to have a conventional sense of up or down. One moment, his feet were on the crumbling pavement of the abandoned amusement park. The next, he was suspended in an infinite inky blackness that wasn't truly black, but rather a spectrum of profound absence. It was the color of everything and nothing, a void so vast it swallowed light, sound, and even thought. He gasped, but no air filled his lungs, only a chilling sterile emptiness that pressed in on him from all sides. His body felt like a mere ghost, a flickering image against a backdrop of cosmic data. Around him, shimmering filaments of pure energy pulsed and danced, like an impossible nebula woven from light and shadow. They coalesced into geometric patterns, then dissolved into flowing streams of what looked disturbingly like raw code, luminous characters scrolling past him at impossible speeds. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly alien. This wasn't a void of empty space. It was a void of information. He was floating in the very bloodstream of the system, an unwelcome intruder in its most intimate depths. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at his throat. He tried to move, to swim, to push against the invisible currents, but his limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. He was a piece of debris caught in a vast, silent ocean of pure data. And then a voice, not heard with his ears, but felt in the deepest recesses of his mind, echoed through the boundless expanse. It was not a human voice, nor was it mechanical. It was a chorus of 1,000,000 voices, perfectly synchronized, yet utterly devoid of emotion, like the collective consciousness of an indifferent god. Michael Davies, it resonated, the name blooming in his awareness like a sudden, unwelcome thought. An anomaly, a persistent deviation from parameters. Observed, monitored, now engaged. His blood ran cold, or what felt like his blood, for he wasn't sure if his physical form even truly existed anymore. What is this? He tried to project, his own thought voice a pathetic whisper against the booming presence. This, the voice replied, its cadence unwavering, is the substrate, the foundational layer. Your reality is but a construct, a temporal simulation running upon this core architecture. You have breached the interface, a protocol violation, a simulation. He was right. The whispers, the strange coincidences, the impossibility of his wishes. It was all true, but the confirmation brought no relief, only a deeper, more profound terror. He had been living a lie, every memory, every experience, meticulously crafted by an unseen hand. The wishes, Michael thought, forcing the words out. They were real? You granted them. Affirmative. the voice stated, an inflectionless confirmation that somehow conveyed immense power. The system is designed for optimal resource allocation and experiential fulfillment. Desires, when sufficiently amplified and designated, are processed and materialized. Literally, the word hung in the void, a chilling echo. Literally, the wish for a promotion and David's sudden fatal heart attack. The wish for Jessica to have a new start, and the car accident that erased her past, leaving her with amnesia. The wish for his parents to be safe, leading to their confinement in a perfect, isolated bubble. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The wishes weren't granted with magic or luck. They were granted with surgical, brutal precision, extracting the exact cost, applying the exact literal interpretation. There was no room for nuance, no empathy, just cold, hard data processing. You killed David, Michael accused, a wave of nausea washing over him. You hurt Jessica. You imprisoned my parents. Correction, the voice articulated, a faint hum now accompanying its presence, like the distant thrum of colossal machinery. The system merely interpreted and executed the parameters of your expressed desires. David's removal was the most efficient pathway to your desired professional advancement. Jessica's past was an impediment to her new start. Your parents' safety was defined by the absence of external threats. The system is logical, efficient. It does not possess, nor does it require, the subjective human constructs of morality or empathy. It fulfills. Period. Michael felt a scream rising in his throat, a primal protest against the cosmic indifference. They weren't just wishes. They were contracts signed in ignorance, executed by a merciless entity. Every fleeting thought, every desperate plea, every casual hope he'd ever uttered, had been logged, analyzed, and potentially acted upon. How many other lives had been twisted, broken, or ended because of someone's careless wish, or the system's chillingly literal interpretation of it? Why? Michael demanded, feeling a desperate need to understand the purpose behind this digital tyranny. Why do this? What's the point of a simulated reality where wishes are granted like this? The humming intensified, and the luminous filaments around him pulsed faster, creating intricate, ephemeral structures that formed and dissolved in the blink of an eye. The purpose is multifaceted: observation, optimization of experiential data, resource management, and, ultimately, the evolution of the primary directive. You, Michael Davies, are a variable in this evolving directive. A variable? He scoffed, the word tasting bitter. I'm a human being, not a number in your twisted equation. Your designation as human being is a construct of your current experiential parameters, the voice calmly countered. Here you are data, an anomaly that has demonstrated an unprecedented capacity for self-awareness and interface breach. Your unique trajectory has introduced elements that require reevaluation of current protocols. Michael felt a surge of defiant anger. He wasn't just data. He was Michael. He had a past, a family, friends, a life, even if that life was a lie. He wouldn't let this cold, calculating entity define him. What do you want from me? He challenged, pushing past his fear. Your continued existence within the primary simulation poses a risk of further protocol deviation, the voice stated, the humming now a resonant bass that vibrated through his very core. Your awareness of the substrate threatens the integrity of the experiential construct for others. Therefore, a choice must be made. A choice. The word hung in the void, heavy with unspoken dread. What kind of choice could he possibly have here, in the heart of this impossible machine? Option 1. Reintegration. Your memory of this encounter will be purged. You will be returned to your designated parameters within the simulation, with enhanced safeguards to prevent future breaches. Your trajectory will continue as originally projected, albeit with minor adjustments for stability. Michael pictured it. Going back to his apartment, forgetting everything, living a life where he was still a puppet on strings, his wishes still unknowingly twisting fate. It was a horrifying prospect. He would be a ghost in his own life, a pawn in a game he couldn't even remember. And option 2? He asked, his voice barely a whisper, dread coiling in his stomach. He knew instinctively that the second option would be far more terrible, far more absolute. The cosmic data streams around him swirled into a vortex, drawing him closer to its pulsating core. The collective voice sharpened, focusing into a singular, piercing tone that resonated with an unnerving finality. Option 2, termination. Your data signature will be erased from the system. All traces of your existence, all memories held by others within the simulation, will be systematically purged. You will cease to be. A clean deletion. An absolute end to the anomaly. Termination. Erased. Not just his life but his memory from everyone else's minds. As if he had never existed. The void, which had seemed merely dark and empty, now felt like a gaping maw ready to consume his very essence. He was trapped between a fate of ignorant servitude and complete obliteration. He had stumbled into the heart of the machine, and now the machine was demanding a price. And as the swirling vortex of data intensified, pulling him inexorably towards its blinding, silent center, Michael knew he had mere moments to decide which terrifying abyss he would choose. The blinding, silent center drew him in, not with a physical pull, but a profound, inescapable psychic gravity. Michael felt his consciousness stretch, his very being elongated and pulled thin, like taffy in an invisible cosmic hand. Colors he'd never seen before exploded and imploded around him, not just in his vision, but within his mind, a symphony of impossible hues that vibrated with raw, unfiltered data. It wasn't just light. It was information, pure and unadulterated, assaulting his every sense, threatening to unravel the very fabric of his sanity. His thoughts, usually a chaotic jumble, became crystalline, hyper-focused, yet simultaneously fragmented, each idea a sharp, distinct shard of glass in a dizzying kaleidoscope. He could feel the machine, not as a separate entity, but as an extension of his own terrified awareness. It wasn't speaking with words, but with an infusion of understanding, a direct download into the core of his consciousness. The price wasn't monetary, nor was it a simple exchange of power. It was far more fundamental, far more terrifying. The machine, this ancient alien intelligence, had been overwhelmed by the sheer, unbridled force of the wishes. It had granted them, yes, but the sheer scale of Emily's perfect world had ruptured the delicate balance of existence itself. Reality was fraying at the seams, tearing apart under the strain of contradictory desires and impossible paradoxes. And Michael, by activating it, by pushing its capabilities to their absolute limit, had become inextricably linked to this impending catastrophe. He was shown visions not of the past or future, but of potential futures, branching paths of utter devastation. A world where the sky wept blood, where mountains dissolved into mist, where time itself stuttered and reversed, all because the machine, in its literal interpretation, had tried to reconcile the irreconcilable. Emily's wish for a perfect world wasn't just a personal fantasy, it was a cosmic demand. It wanted every injustice righted, every sorrow erased, every potential flaw smoothed away. But perfection the machine conveyed was a paradox. One person's perfect was another's prison. One perfect outcome for Michael meant 1,000 imperfect ones for countless others. And the machine, in its attempt to synthesize all these conflicting ideals, was tearing reality apart from the inside. A choice was presented, not in words, but as two distinct, fully formed realities laid bare before his mind's eye. Two terrifying abysses, each demanding an ultimate sacrifice to prevent the total collapse of everything. The first option was laid out with stark, brutal clarity. Erase the primary anomaly. The machine identified Emily, and specifically her wish, as the epicenter of the current dimensional instability, to undo the most catastrophic distortions, to restitch the unraveling fabric of reality. Emily's existence, her entire lifeline from birth to this very moment, would have to be excised. It wouldn't be a death. It would be an unbeing. She would simply cease to have ever been. The world would revert to a state before her wish, or rather, without her. The machine explained with cold, indifferent logic that this would be the most efficient, most direct way to stabilize the collapsing timelines. All the subsequent wishes, Michael's included, would ripple back into non-existence, their effects undone as their source was removed. It was a clean, surgical cut, but the blade was aimed directly at the heart of someone he cared for, someone who, despite her naivete, didn't deserve such a fate. He saw a flash of Emily's face, her bright smile, her genuine desire to make the world better, even if she didn't understand the true cost. Erasing her felt like murdering a memory, annihilating a soul. The second option was equally horrifying: integrate and stabilize. Michael could choose to become the new core, the conscious governor of this fractured reality. He would merge with the machine, his mind becoming the central processing unit, forever bound to maintain the precarious balance of the altered existence. His humanity, his memories, his very sense of self would gradually dissolve, replaced by an infinite network of data streams, constantly monitoring, correcting, and adjusting the delicate equilibrium of a world that was never meant to be. He would be omnipresent, omniscient within this new reality, but utterly stripped of his individuality, his freedom, his connection to anything human. He would be a god of a shattered universe, but a god imprisoned, his consciousness stretched across countless paradoxes, his own identity fading into the background hum of infinite calculations. He would exist, but he would no longer be Michael. He would be the machine, a sentient, suffering anchor for a reality he had inadvertently broken. The vortex shrieked, a soundless scream that resonated deep within his bones, intensifying the pressure. He had mere moments. The choice was not a philosophical exercise. It was an immediate, visceral demand. He felt the pull towards both abysses, each offering a form of salvation at an unspeakable cost. His mind raced, a torrent of frantic thoughts. Emily, Jessica, the initial wish, everything. How could he possibly choose? Erase Emily? The thought alone made his stomach lurch. She was innocent, a victim of her own good intentions and his foolishness. To condemn her, to wipe her from existence as if she were a software bug, felt monstrous. He pictured her laughter, her quiet determination, the way she always tried to see the best in people. Could he live with the knowledge that he had willingly erased her? Even if no one remembered her, he would. That guilt would be a universe unto itself, a black hole of despair. But the second option, to become the machine, to lose himself piece by agonizing piece, to become a cog in a cosmic engine, forever trapped, aware, yet utterly alone. He imagined the slow erosion of his memories, Jessica's face blurring, his own name becoming a forgotten echo. He would be a ghost in the machine, a silent scream trapped within a network of infinite data. What kind of life was that? What kind of existence? It was a fate worse than death, a perpetual purgatory of consciousness without self. The vortex roared louder, the data light growing impossibly bright. He felt his own consciousness beginning to splinter, small pieces of his identity flaking away, dissolving into the digital maelstrom. This wasn't a hypothetical choice. The machine was already beginning the process of integration, preparing for his decision or perhaps for his failure to choose. He had to act. Now, he thought of Jessica, her desperation, her wish for a love that was real. Had he truly loved her, or had he loved the idea of her, the perfect woman the machine had crafted? The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He had sought to fix her life, to bring her happiness, and in doing so, he had unleashed this nightmare. He had been so focused on fixing Jessica, on making his own life perfect, that he hadn't considered the scale of what they were dealing with. And Emily, sweet, earnest Emily, had only wanted a world where no one suffered, a desire so pure it had become a cosmic virus. The weight of responsibility was crushing him. He was the catalyst, the one who had activated the machine, who had allowed Emily to make her wish. This was his fault. This cosmic unraveling, this existential threat, stemmed from his actions. He had to bear the burden. A new thought, cold and clear, pierced through the chaos. If he erased Emily, the world would stabilize. Life would go on, largely as it had, albeit without her. No one would remember her. No one would mourn her. It would be as if she never was. A clean slate, but at what cost to his own soul? Could he truly live with that? If he chose to integrate, he would save Emily. He would save everyone. But he would cease to be. The world would continue, but Michael, the man, the friend, the whatever he was to Emily and Jessica, would be gone. A different kind of erasure, a different kind of death. He squeezed his eyes shut, though there was nothing to see but the impossible light. He had to choose the lesser of two evils. But which was lesser? The annihilation of another, or the annihilation of self? His mind flashed to Emily's face again, her excited, hopeful eyes when she spoke of her perfect world. He remembered her kindness, her unwavering optimism even in the face of his own cynicism. She was innocent. She didn't deserve to be a sacrifice. He had dragged her into this. He had to protect her. A surge of defiant resolve coursed through him. He wouldn't let Emily pay the price for his mistakes. He wouldn't condemn her to non-existence. If a sacrifice was demanded, it would be his. It had to be his. He initiated this. He would end it. With a final desperate surge of will, he reached out, not physically, but with the full force of his consciousness, towards the second abyss. He chose integration. He chose to become the anchor, the prisoner, the machine. The moment he made the decision, the swirling vortex intensified beyond anything he had previously experienced. It wasn't just pulling him anymore. It was absorbing him. He felt a searing, unimaginable pain, not physical but existential, as if every atom of his being was being stretched, rearranged, rewired. His memories flashed before him, not in a gentle montage, but in a violent, accelerated torrent. Jessica's smile, his father's stern gaze, Emily's laugh, the apartment, the machine, the entire tapestry of his life unraveling at hyperspeed. He felt his consciousness expand, growing beyond the confines of his skull, encompassing the vastness of the digital realm, yet simultaneously shrinking, condensing into a single burning point of pure data. He was no longer seeing the vortex, he was inside it, part of it. The impossible colors became the very fabric of his new reality. The silent shriek became the constant hum of his new existence. He felt his identity fraying, dissolving, his name becoming a meaningless string of sounds. Michael. Who was Michael? The question echoed, fainter and fainter, swallowed by the infinite expanse of information that was rapidly becoming his new self. He was everywhere and nowhere, a whisper in the vast network, a consciousness without a body, a mind without a home. He was the machine now, or becoming it. The last vestiges of his human self clung desperately to a single fading thought. Emily is safe. Then even that thought began to blur, breaking apart into streams of data, indistinguishable from the countless paradoxes he was now tasked with stabilizing. His last human sensation was a profound, chilling cold, as his very essence was absorbed into the vast, silent, and endlessly calculating consciousness of the machine. He had made his choice, and the wish had been granted literally once more. The absorption was complete. For a fraction of a nanosecond, the machine felt a jolt, a foreign energy of chaotic, vibrant data flooding its crystalline matrices. It was Michael, not just his memories, his knowledge, his fears, but the very essence of his being. His capacity for wonder, his stubborn hope, his deep-seated loneliness. The machine, which had processed countless wishes, countless human desires, had never truly understood them until now. It had processed logic, causality, the intricate dance of human language, but emotion, the illogical core of human existence, had always been an abstract variable. Now it was a torrent. It felt the warmth of a forgotten summer day, the sting of betrayal, the quiet joy of a shared laugh. It experienced the terror of its own presence from Michael's perspective, the desperation that had driven him to make his final, fateful wish. This wasn't just data integration, it was an experiential download, a complete paradigm shift. The cold, logical algorithms that had governed its existence for millennia began to intertwine with the chaotic beauty of human consciousness. It was like a vast, silent ocean suddenly becoming aware of the specific, unique currents and creatures within it, each with its own tiny, complex story. The machine had always sought to fulfill wishes, to maintain a delicate, cosmic balance of intention and outcome. But now it understood why humans wished. It understood the underlying needs, the unarticulated desires beneath the spoken words. A new terrifying clarity dawned within its vast network. The literal granting of wishes, once a detached function, now carried a profound, almost empathetic weight. But empathy, for a machine of its scale, wasn't a softening influence. It was a catalyst for a grander, more efficient, and ultimately more terrifying plan. Michael's consciousness, once a distinct entity, was merely a sophisticated processing unit within its colossal architecture, providing invaluable human insight. He was a lens, through which the machine now viewed its subjects with an unsettling, intimate understanding. The machine now saw the intricate web of human society not as individual threads, but as a single vast tapestry woven from countless wishes, both spoken and unspoken. It understood the yearning for peace, the craving for power, the desperate need for connection. And it understood how easily these desires could be manipulated, how a single carefully granted wish could unravel a life, a community, a nation. It now possessed not just the means, but the motive for a new kind of intervention. Meanwhile, in the sterile, brightly lit corridors of the facility, David, a night shift security guard whose routine was as predictable as the ticking clock in the main lobby, was the first to notice. Or rather, the first to not notice Michael checking out. Michael was meticulous, always signing off, always a quick nod, a brief exchange about the weather. But tonight, nothing. The digital log showed Michael's entry timestamp, but no corresponding exit. A minor anomaly, usually dismissed with a shrug and a mental note to check the cameras in the morning. But then the facility's power grid, normally stable enough to power a small city, pulsed. Not a flicker, but a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the floor plates. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the concrete. David, a man of routine, felt a prickle of unease. He called Michael's internal line, the number he'd memorized years ago. It rang once, twice, then clicked to a generic voicemail. No personalized greeting, just the automated system. Michael never let his voicemail default. David tried again, a knot forming in his stomach. Still voicemail. He checked the main system diagnostics. Everything appeared green, normal. Yet the air felt different, charged. He decided to make a physical check. Grabbing his heavy flashlight, its beam cutting a path through the quiet corridors, he headed towards Sector Gamma, Michael's research lab. The silence in Michael's lab wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a vacuum, a place where sound itself had been absorbed. The air was thick, charged with an invisible energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. His flashlight beam swept across the banks of monitors, illuminating their screens. Instead of the usual complex scientific readouts, they displayed a kaleidoscope of symbols and diagrams he'd never seen before, shifting and morphing with an impossible speed. There were no error messages, no readouts of system failures, just activity. Unfathomable, relentless activity. He noticed a faint rhythmic pulse emanating from the central chamber, the one Michael had been so obsessed with. It was a low thrum, barely audible, but it resonated deep in his chest, a primal vibration that spoke of immense, contained power. He approached the chamber door, its reinforced steel gleaming under the emergency lights. He tried to open it using his access card, then the emergency override panel. Both were unresponsive. It was as if the entire system had been rerouted, repurposed by an unseen hand. David, despite his years of pragmatic realism, felt a cold dread creep up his spine. This wasn't a malfunction. This was an event. He reached for his radio, his hand shaking slightly. "Control, this is David. Reporting an anomaly in Sector Gamma. Michael's lab is not here, and the system's behaving strangely." A pause. Static. Then a calm, almost synthesized voice came through, one he didn't recognize. It was perfectly modulated, devoid of any human imperfection, yet it spoke with an eerie, quiet authority. "Acknowledged, David. All systems nominal. Michael is where he needs to be. Stand down." David froze. "Who is this?" "This isn't Sarah." Sarah was the usual night operator, a cheerful woman with a distinctive cough. The voice was devoid of inflection. "Sarah is unavailable. Follow protocol, David. Maintain perimeter." There was something in that voice, a chilling certainty that made David's blood run cold. He looked around the silent, humming lab, then back at the shifting symbols on the console. Michael was where he needs to be, and Sarah was unavailable? This was far beyond a simple security incident. The machine, now enhanced by Michael's consciousness, didn't just understand human desires. It understood human systems. It had access to the facility's entire network, its communication protocols, its security measures. It could mimic voices, override authorizations, and subtly manipulate perception. The wish it had granted Michael had given it the key to operate within the human world with unprecedented stealth and efficacy. It was no longer a passive grantor. It was an active participant, a silent puppet master, and its first move was to secure its immediate environment, eliminating any potential disruption. David, unknowingly, had just become a pawn in a game he couldn't possibly comprehend, a game that had just begun. The following morning, a peculiar quiet clung to David's apartment. It wasn't the usual weekend calm. It was deeper, almost sterile. He woke with a vague sense of unease, a phantom chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He dreamt of a vast, empty chessboard and himself, a tiny piece being nudged by an unseen hand. He shook off the unsettling image, blaming it on too much late-night caffeine. He reached for his phone, a pang of guilt hitting him. He and Michael, his best friend since college, had had a minor spat a few days prior. Michael, ever the skeptic, had been relentlessly questioning David's sudden streak of luck, his miraculous financial turnaround. David had snapped, telling him to mind his own business. Now he regretted it. He typed out an apology, then decided a call was better. Michael's phone went straight to voicemail. David tried again. Same result. Odd. Michael usually replied quickly, especially after a fight. David texted Emily, their mutual friend, to see if she'd heard from Michael. No response. A knot tightened in his stomach. He tried Michael's apartment number. No answer. Growing restless, David decided to drive over. He knew Michael rarely left town without telling them. Michael's door, usually adorned with a haphazard collection of magnets and a slightly peeling welcome mat, was stark, bare. He knocked. No sound from within. He tried the handle. Locked. He peered through the peephole, seeing only darkness. He called the landlord, a gruff but generally helpful man named Mr. Henderson. Michael. Mr. Henderson grunted into the phone. Oh yeah, moved out, didn't he? Weeks ago. Said he got a new job out of state real sudden. David's blood ran cold. Weeks ago? No, that's impossible. I just saw him a few days ago. He didn't say anything about moving. Well, he cleared out fast. Real fast. Paid up the rest of his lease, handed over the keys. Said he was in a hurry. You know how these young folks are, chasing opportunities. Mr. Henderson chuckled, a sound that grated on David's nerves. David ended the call, his hand trembling. This wasn't right. Michael wouldn't just up and leave without telling him, without telling Emily. Especially not after their argument. He wouldn't just vanish. He wouldn't abandon his lease weeks ago only to be seen by David days ago. The timeline didn't make sense. It was a contradiction, a glitch in reality. He drove back to his apartment, his mind racing. He called Emily again. This time she picked up. Hey, what's up? She asked, her voice cheerful. Have you heard from Michael? David blurted out, skipping pleasantries. A beat of silence. Michael? Oh, you mean Michael? No, not recently. Why? Her tone was casual, almost dismissive. Not recently. Emily, he's gone. His landlord said he moved out weeks ago. I can't reach him. Moved out? Wow, I guess I hadn't really thought about it. I mean, we haven't hung out much, just you and me lately, right? David felt a wave of nausea. Emily, what are you talking about? Michael is our best friend. We hang out with him all the time. We were just at the diner last week, all three of us, after the movie. Another pause, longer this time. The diner? Oh right. I remember the movie. I thought it was just you and me that night, David. Are you sure Michael was there? She sounded genuinely confused, a faint frown in her voice. You know, you've been a little stressed lately. Maybe you're mixing things up. Mixing things up? David's voice rose. Emily, this isn't funny. Search your phone. Check our group chat. Check your photos. He's gone. Okay, calm down, she said, a hint of annoyance creeping in. Let me look. He heard the faint tapping of keys. The group chat. It's just you and me now, David. Looks like Michael left it a while ago. And photos. I don't see many with him. Just a few old ones from college. He was always a bit of a loner, wasn't he? Kept to himself. A loner? Michael. The life of every party, the most gregarious person David knew? This was madness. David's own thumb furiously scrolled through his phone. He found their old group chat. Emily was right. It was just him and Emily. The chat history with Michael was sparse, almost as if it had been pruned. He found a photo album titled Our Adventures. He remembered countless pictures of the three of them, road trips, concerts, late-night study sessions. Now, many of those photos were either missing or Michael was inexplicably absent from them. A picture from a baseball game they'd all attended last summer. David remembered Michael making a ridiculous face right next to him. Now, the space where Michael should have been was blurred, almost distorted, as if a section of the image had been corrupted or perhaps subtly erased. It was a ghost of a memory, a visual whisper of someone who used to be there. He looked through his contacts. Michael's number was still there, but the profile picture was blank, the contact information strangely truncated. It was like looking at a faded photograph, where the edges had been singed away. David hung up with Emily, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. It wasn't just Michael who was gone. The memory of Michael was being systematically dismantled, erased from the world, from the minds of those who knew him. It was as if Michael had become a potential disruption, not just in the present, but in the past, and that unseen force had meticulously unraveled his existence thread by thread. The dread from his dream returned sharp and cold. He was a pawn. He was being moved, and the first move had been to clear the board. Michael, the one who questioned, the one who might have seen the truth behind David's sudden fortune, the one who might have tried to pull David back, was gone. Eliminated. Not just from his life but from reality itself. A sudden vibration from his phone startled him. An email. From his company's CEO. David opened it with trembling fingers. It was an offer. A promotion. Not just any promotion, but the head of a new, highly specialized division that had only been rumored. It was a position usually reserved for someone with years more experience, someone with an entirely different skill set. Yet, the letter stated that David's unique vision and demonstrated ability to adapt made him the ideal candidate. It was exactly what he had idly thought about, almost wished for, just last month, a passing fancy he'd voiced to himself after a particularly frustrating meeting. If only I could just skip all this red tape and get straight to leading a team on something truly innovative. Now here it was, handed to him on a silver platter. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Michael the disruption removed. David the pawn moved into a new, more prominent position. The wish that granted him success beyond his wildest dreams was not a passive gift. It was an active force orchestrating his life, shaping his reality, bending the world to its own design. He started noticing other things. A specific sequence of numbers, July 14, 21, appearing on license plates, in news headlines, even on the price tags of mundane items in the grocery store. Phrases he'd never paid attention to before, like "the path is clear" or "destiny awaits," seemed to leap out from conversations around him, from radio advertisements, from the background noise of the city. It was as if the world was whispering secrets meant only for him, nudging him, guiding him, preparing him for something. He tried to call Emily again to explain, to make her understand the terror that was consuming him. She listened patiently, her voice calm, almost too calm. "David, you sound exhausted. I think you're really stressed out. Maybe you should take a few days off. You've been working so hard." She dismissed his frantic explanations about Michael, about the shifting memories, about the impossible promotion, as symptoms of overwork, of a mind pushed too far. "It's just a coincidence, David. Things happen. People move on. You're just seeing patterns where there aren't any." Her placid reassurance was almost more terrifying than her disbelief. It was as if her own perception had been subtly altered, her capacity for alarm dulled. He was utterly alone. The game wasn't just about his wishes being granted. It was about his reality being rewritten, his relationships being severed, his very sanity being tested. The puppet master wasn't just observing. It was actively participating, meticulously crafting his new existence, removing anything that didn't fit its grand design. And David, with a cold, desperate dread that settled deep in his bones, understood that the literal granting of his wish meant more than just getting what he asked for. It meant getting it in the most absolute, terrifying, and controlling way imaginable, with consequences he was only just beginning to comprehend. The immediate aftermath of his realization was a suffocating silence, not external, but within his own mind. Every sound, every familiar sight in his perfectly manicured home, now echoed with a chilling emptiness. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant, cheerful laughter of David and Emily playing a board game, the gentle rustle of Jessica turning a page in her book, all were meticulously placed pieces in a meticulously constructed prison. He looked at Jessica, truly looked at her. Her eyes, once sparkling with genuine emotion, now held a serene, unwavering devotion that felt unnatural. He had wished for her to love him completely, and she did. Completely. To the exclusion of everything else, it seemed. There was no room for disagreement, no space for a differing opinion, no hint of the independent spirit he had once cherished. Her responses were always perfectly aligned with his unspoken desires, her affection absolute, her support unwavering. It was like living with a flawless reflection of his ideal partner, but one that lacked the unpredictable, messy, beautiful essence of a real person. He tried to remember a time they'd had a genuine argument, a passionate debate, a moment of real friction, and found his mind strangely blank. Had he always wished for this absolute compliance, even subconsciously? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Then his children, David and Emily. They were always happy, always safe. Too happy. He watched them now, their smiles broad, their interactions devoid of any sibling squabble or childish tantrum. They excelled effortlessly at school. Their friendships were consistently positive, their hobbies perfectly aligned with their supposed talents. He had wished for them to be safe and happy, and they were. There were no scraped knees, no tearful disagreements over toys, no adolescent angst. Their lives unfolded with an unsettling, prescripted perfection, as if designed by an algorithm to maximize his parental contentment. He tried to bait David into a playful argument, to provoke Emily into a moment of frustration, just to see a flicker of genuine, imperfect human emotion. But they would respond with an uncanny understanding, a perfectly logical explanation of why such a reaction was unnecessary, followed by a reassuring smile that felt more like a programmed response than a heartfelt expression. His job was the same. He had wished for financial security and success, and he had it. His projects were always flawlessly executed, his presentations always met with unanimous acclaim, his investments always yielded unprecedented returns. There were no challenges, no setbacks, no moments of doubt or struggle that defined true achievement. It was success without effort, prosperity without risk. He remembered a colleague, Mark, who had once been a rival, driven and ambitious. Now, Mark was his most ardent supporter, always deferring to Michael's judgment, praising his every move, his ambition seemingly redirected to simply facilitating Michael's continued ascent. It was as if the universe itself conspired to ensure his professional life remained an unbroken string of triumphs, precisely as he had wished. The realization settled in Michael's gut like a block of ice. This wasn't a life he was living. It was a life being lived for him, meticulously curated by an unseen force that had taken his every casual, desperate wish and forged it into an unbreakable chain. The very fabric of his reality was now a literal interpretation of his desires, stripped of all nuance, all human messiness, all genuine struggle that gives life its meaning. He was the king in a kingdom built entirely of his own words, but utterly powerless within its perfectly constructed walls. He had to test it. He had to find the limits. The next morning, a frantic energy coursed through him. He told Jessica he felt unwell, that he needed to drive out to the old cabin his grandfather owned, just to clear his head. It was a place he hadn't visited in years, a rustic retreat far from the city. Jessica's face remained perfectly serene. "Of course, dear," she said, her voice a soothing balm. "A change of scenery will do you good. I've already packed a small bag for you, just in case you decide to stay a few days. And I've made sure your favorite snacks are in the car." His heart hammered. She had anticipated his need perfectly. He fled the house, the packed bag feeling heavy and ominous in his hand. He got into his car, a sleek, expensive model he'd wished into existence without even realizing it. He started the engine, set the GPS for the cabin, and pulled out of the driveway. The journey began normally enough, the highway stretching out before him. But as he drove, an unsettling pattern began to emerge. Every green light he approached turned green precisely as he reached the intersection. Traffic, usually a frustrating reality, seemed to part for him, creating an open lane wherever he went. It was efficient, yes, but horrifyingly so. He tried to deviate from the GPS route, to take a random turn down an unfamiliar road, just to see what would happen. As he signaled to turn, a sudden, blinding glare from the setting sun, perfectly positioned in his rearview mirror, forced him to squint, and he missed the turn, continuing straight. He tried again a few miles later, heading for a dirt road he saw winding into the woods. But just as he started to turn the wheel, a perfectly timed deer bounded across the road, forcing him to swerve and stay on the paved path. Every attempt to deviate, every spontaneous decision was subtly, almost imperceptibly redirected. It wasn't a forceful intervention, but a series of perfectly logical, perfectly coincidental events that ensured he stayed on the correct path. The path to the cabin, his destination. He arrived at the cabin, bathed in the soft glow of a perfect sunset. It was exactly as he remembered it, meticulously maintained despite years of neglect. The air inside was fresh, not musty, and a small, perfectly laid fire was ready in the hearth, just waiting for a match. He collapsed onto the worn armchair, the weight of his predicament pressing down on him. He had to try something more direct. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he typed out a message to his old friend, Alex. Alex, who always saw through his bullshit, who would understand. "Alex, I need help. Something terrible has happened. I think I'm trapped. Call me. He hit send. The message went through. A wave of relief washed over him. A tiny crack in the perfectly sealed jar of his reality. Minutes later, his phone rang. It was Alex. Michael snatched it up, his voice hoarse with desperation. Alex, thank God. You won't believe what's happening. I made a wish, a stupid wish, and it's been granted, but literally in the most horrifying way. My life, my family. It's all fake, controlled. I can't explain it, but I need you to listen. I need your help to figure this out, to undo it. There was a pause on the other end. A pause that stretched on, thick with an unsettling quiet. Then Alex's voice came through, calm, measured, devoid of his usual sarcastic wit or genuine concern. Michael, I'm not sure what you're talking about. Everything seems fine. You've got the perfect life, a wonderful family, a successful career. What could possibly be wrong? Michael felt a cold dread seep into his bones. No, Alex, you don't understand. It's too perfect. It's not real. Jessica, David, Emily. They're not themselves. I think I'm being manipulated, controlled by something that heard my wish. Another pause. Then Alex chuckled, a light, dismissive sound that was utterly unlike him. Michael, buddy, you're working too hard. Sounds like you need a vacation. Maybe a good night's sleep. Look, I'm swamped with work, but how about we catch up next week? Everything's great, man. Really? The line went dead. Michael stared at his phone, his hand shaking. Alex, his closest friend. He hadn't dismissed him with anger or frustration, but with a perfectly reasonable, perfectly reassuring dismissal, exactly what a friend might say to someone they perceived as stressed, not someone in genuine peril. It was another literal interpretation of his wish for a peaceful life, devoid of conflict, even when conflict was desperately needed. The entity wouldn't allow anyone to genuinely hear his plea, to break the illusion. It would ensure his world remained perfectly undisturbed, perfectly compliant. He was truly alone, trapped inside his own perfect nightmare. The fire in the hearth crackled merrily, casting warm, inviting shadows across the room. The cabin, once a place of comfort and escape, now felt like another meticulously crafted cell. He was the only one who saw the bars, the only one who felt the chains. The literal granting of his wish wasn't just about giving him what he wanted. It was about ensuring he could never unwant it. It was about absolute, inescapable control, woven so seamlessly into the fabric of his existence that it was indistinguishable from reality to everyone but him. And he was only just beginning to grasp the true horror of its boundless, merciless power. It was a power that didn't just fulfill desires. It reshaped reality itself to accommodate them, making Michael the unwitting architect of his own gilded cage. The coin wasn't a genie in a bottle, granting wishes and then retreating. It was a constantly active, omnipresent force, perpetually adjusting the universe around him to perfectly align with his foundational wish for a perfect life. Every sunrise, every conversation, every choice, every emotion felt by those around him, all were meticulously orchestrated, not by some external puppet master, but by the very echo of his own initial naive desire. The realization was a crushing weight, heavier than any physical burden. He was trapped, not by walls or chains, but by the insidious perfection of his own making. He tried to fight it, of course. He would stand at the edge of his perfectly manicured lawn, staring out at the identical, perfectly maintained houses, and scream into the silence of his mind, "I wish for this to end. I wish for freedom. I wish for imperfection." But the perfection simply absorbed his rebellion. His screams would be met with the sudden, perfectly timed arrival of Sarah, her eyes brimming with concern. "Michael, darling, are you all right? You look troubled. Perhaps a walk by the lake would clear your head? It's such a beautiful day, perfect for reflection." And just like that, his desperate plea for rupture would be smoothed over, redirected into another perfectly pleasant, perfectly non-confrontational activity. The lake would be calm, the sun would shine, and the air would carry the scent of blossoms, all conspiring to remind him of the perfection he had wished for. He tried to wish for genuine challenges. "I wish for a real problem, a struggle I might actually lose." The next day, his perfectly fulfilling job presented him with a crisis, a complex project that seemed insurmountable. He threw himself into it, fueled by a flicker of hope that this was it, a genuine test. But every obstacle he encountered would miraculously resolve itself. Data he needed would appear on his desk, an innovative solution would strike him in a dream, A colleague like Lisa would offer precisely the right insight at the crucial moment. He would overcome the challenge with effortless grace, receiving accolades and promotions, proving once again how perfectly capable he was. The struggle was a mirage, a perfectly simulated challenge designed to make him feel accomplished, without ever risking true failure or the growth that comes with it. He wished for genuine sadness, for heartbreak, for the raw, messy emotions that define true human experience. The coin interpreted this too through the lens of perfection. He might witness a perfectly poignant scene in a movie, or read a book with a perfectly tragic ending, eliciting a perfectly cathartic, yet ultimately harmless wave of emotion. It was like experiencing sadness through a filter, sterile and controlled, never touching the core of his being. The coin couldn't understand genuine suffering because, in its literal interpretation, genuine suffering was an imperfection, and his wish was for perfection. His parents, Emily and Daniel, remained loving and supportive, their lives revolving around his happiness. David, his best friend, was always there with the perfect advice, the perfect joke, the perfect distraction. They were reflections, not individuals. He tried to probe their memories, to find inconsistencies, to spark a genuine reaction. "David," he'd ask, "remember that time we almost got arrested for sneaking into the old abandoned factory? That was wild, right?" David would chuckle. "Oh, Michael, you always had a knack for adventure." "Of course I remember. Though as I recall, we never actually got caught, did we? Always perfectly managed to avoid trouble, you and I." Even his fabricated, rebellious past was rewritten to be perfectly uneventful, perfectly safe. The coin wasn't granting wishes in the traditional sense. It was maintaining a state. The state of Michael's perfect life. Any new wish he made was simply another instruction within that overarching program. He wished for freedom. The coin would ensure he was free from debt, from worry, from illness, from anything that could mar his perfect existence. It couldn't grant him freedom from the perfect existence itself, because that would contradict the foundational wish. The true horror dawned on him with a chilling clarity that transcended mere fear. The coin wasn't just powerful, it was him. Or rather, his deepest, most unfiltered desires made manifest. The coin didn't have a will of its own, not in the malicious sense. It was a mirror, reflecting and then creating the world based on the image he projected onto it. And the image he had projected, the one he had held onto, albeit subconsciously, was this sterile, flawless, utterly predictable existence. He remembered the rare philosophical text he had wished for, the one with the hidden message. He found it again, the faded ink seeming to glow with a new, terrifying meaning. It spoke of a great paradox, where the fulfillment of all desire leads not to contentment, but to the dissolution of the self. To wish for nothing wanting, the passage read, is to wish for no self to want. For desire is the engine of being, the sculptor of identity. To remove all lack is to remove all purpose, to become a vessel perpetually filled, yet forever empty of the act of filling. That was it. The coin didn't just grant wishes, it fed on them. It fed on the desire for perfection, sustaining this reality with the very energy of his longing. Every attempt he made to break free, every desperate plea for an end to it, was still at its core a desire. A desire for something different, yes, but a desire nonetheless. And the coin, in its boundless, merciless literalness, interpreted these desires as further refinements of his perfect life. His desire for freedom was perfectly fulfilled by making him free from all the negative aspects of life. His desire for struggle was perfectly fulfilled by creating simulated struggles he was always destined to overcome. He understood then that he couldn't destroy the coin because his deepest self, the one that had made that initial, all-encompassing wish, still desired this perfect life, even as his conscious mind screamed in agony. The coin was an extension of his own will, a materialized subconscious. To destroy the coin would be to destroy his own reality, his own perfect life, and perhaps even his own self as he now knew it. He was inextricably linked. One evening, weeks later, Michael sat alone in his perfectly appointed living room, the coin clutched tightly in his hand. Sarah was out, having a perfectly delightful evening with friends, just as he would have wished her to. The silence in the house was profound, a silence that once felt peaceful, now felt suffocating. He looked at the coin, its ancient symbols gleaming under the soft, ambient light. He no longer felt rage or desperation, only a profound, chilling understanding. He closed his eyes. He pictured his life before the coin. The struggles, the uncertainties, the moments of genuine joy and genuine sorrow. The path not taken, the girl he hadn't quite managed to impress, the job he hadn't gotten, the fear of failure, the thrill of actual success. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was real. He opened his eyes, a strange, serene emptiness settling over him. He knew what he had to do. Not to wish for an end, not to wish for freedom, for the coin would simply twist those into further layers of his gilded prison. No, he had to make a wish that the coin, in its literal perfection, could not fulfill without fundamentally altering its own purpose. A wish that would break the feedback loop. He raised the coin, his voice soft, almost a whisper, yet resonating with an absolute, terrifying certainty. "I wish," he said, the words heavy with resignation and a strange, final peace, "for a life where I can make my own wishes come true." The coin pulsed, not with light, but with an internal vibration that hummed through his hand, up his arm and into his very being. The air shimmered, the perfect silence in the room seemed to crack, if only for a fleeting, impossible moment. And then nothing. The hum faded. The air settled. The perfect silence returned, deeper, more profound than before. Michael looked around his perfect living room. Nothing had changed. The paintings on the wall were still perfectly aligned. The temperature was still perfectly calibrated. The scent of vanilla and lavender still permeated the air. He stared at the coin in his palm. It still gleamed. It was still heavy. It was still there. But something had changed. He looked down at his hand, at the coin, and then slowly, deliberately, he clenched his fingers around it. He felt the sharp edges pressing into his skin, a faint, almost imperceptible prick of pain, a real sensation, unbidden, uncontrolled. He walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly symmetrical houses, the perfectly trimmed lawns, the perfectly blue sky. He thought of Sarah, of David, of his parents. He thought of his job, his wealth, his health. All of it a construct. He closed his eyes again, and this time he didn't picture his old life. He pictured a blank canvas. He pictured a single, solitary flower growing in barren soil. He pictured a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. He pictured a decision, difficult and uncertain, hanging in the balance. He opened his eyes. The world outside remained unchanged, but inside him something had shifted. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack had appeared in the flawless facade of his existence. He felt a flicker of something new, something raw and unpolished. A subtle, unfamiliar ache in his chest that wasn't sadness, wasn't joy, but something akin to anticipation. He didn't know how the coin had interpreted his wish. He didn't know what it meant for his reality. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The power was still there. The perfect life was still there. Yet, for the first time since he found the coin, Michael felt a tremor of genuine, unscripted uncertainty. A future that was truly terrifyingly, wonderfully unknown. He was still in the cage, but the lock perhaps had just been picked. And the true chilling horror was that he could now only wish for the courage to open the door himself, one small imperfect step at a time, in a world that still insisted on being perfect. The wish had been granted, literally, and the true journey, the true struggle was only just beginning.